In today's Diablo 4 video, we'll take a look at one of my favorite builds for the brand new Spiritborn class. This uses the power of fear itself to instantly take down enemies, spread a lot of CC, and especially poison over time effects. The build works very well both from level 1 and even after level 60, it continues to get even stronger, letting you continue to push into higher torment levels. Now, our main sources of damage with this build are going to be the Centipede abilities, specifically Scourge and the Devour. These are two of the best at pretty much wiping out entire groups of enemies via the massive poison buildup, which also works really great against bosses. Later on, there's the potential to further make the damage on these even better with the Menacing and Tormentors aspect and combining this with a very high Thorns build. It literally means you can turn off one button, move around, and everything around you will absolutely explode in one single shot. That being said, in the Spirit Hall, the two options we're going with are both going to be Centipede. Now, there is a case to be made going with the Gorilla instead, which would provide a much needed barrier for this rather squishy build, but unfortunately that one only triggers on casting an ability, and otherwise it is not continuous, unlike the Centipede buff, which pretty much heals you every time you hit a target. And guess what? With something like a Scourge, you're going to continuously do that every single second. Plus, we're going to massively extend its range later on once we reach higher levels. And we can kind of bypass the need for a shield with some of the uniques in the game, like Temerity, which is going to provide us barrier as we exceed the max HP with the healing that we perform. And of course, the Loyalty's Mantle, another unique that's going to further double the effect of these Spirit Hall buffs right here if we match them. So this literally means double the amount of normal damage we get from Centipede, as well as damage reduction and even slow effects against the affected targets. So here is the skill tree, starting with the Withering Fist. This is going to just spread a lot of poison to targets, especially if you're going with the Sharp upgrade. This is going to help it jump to 3 additional targets, but later on I recommend accelerated version, as that's going to reduce some of the incoming damage by 20%. We're going to combine this with the Stinger, another amazing AoE. It's going to provide poison buildup, plus it makes the damage echo to poison targets. Early on, you can go with Advantageous, which helps a bit with healing, but later on I recommend Rampant to increase damage to your primary target, however at the cost of no longer having the echo. Besides that, we have Vigorous, which just helps us with the vigor generation as we cast core skills. In the focus category, we have a couple of options. Either go with Soar, which I recommend early on, as it's an amazing mobility skill. It helps you jump over obstacles, plus it's very good at applying vulnerable on targets, especially with replenishing Soar upgrade. But later on, if you want to fully buff poison damage with Thorns, you might want Toxic Skin with replenishing Toxic Skin, which is going to increase that poison Thorns damage against targets by 100%. Now, for the next section, we have Defensive, and this is where your first one of the best abilities starts unlocking, and that is going to be the Scourge. Not only is this going to be a Centipede skill that fears targets, it applies a massive poison over time effect, and with the adaptable Scourge, you can even make it lifesteal, so you heal over time and you stay alive for longer. Plus, we can combine this later on with the Menacing aspect, which is going to let it continue to linger on our character as we move on, further fearing any targets in our range. Besides this, we use Nourishment, which increases the healing by 20%, and when we heal, increases our poison too. And I'm also recommending the Bastion, especially if you generate barriers, you're going to gain 30% more Thorns, so you guessed it, even more damage. In the potency, I went with the Touch of Death, amazing at keeping you alive, provides even more healing over time, both during as it's affecting the target as well as at the expiration when it starts jumping on other targets. Plus, the poison over time effect on it is very strong. We can even turn this into a core skill via Poised Touch of Death, which means we can spam it with one of the later on upgrades right after this. So we can have 3 active at the same time, which are absolutely devastating. Besides this, I went with the Ravenous, plus of course the Oppressive, which just make our Centipede skills deal even more damage against healthy targets and also against targets affected by crowd control, which guess what, they are going to be all the time. Now, in this category, assuming that you're going with the Gorilla in the skill hall, you're going to maybe want to pick Resilient, which is going to make casting a Gorilla skill also grant 15% increase to max HP, but only if you go with that, as that's going to turn all your abilities into Gorilla abilities. Personally, I picked it, didn't like it, and switched back. And we have the ultimate. Now, ultimate is where it becomes interesting because this is when we get to unlock Devour, our absolute highest damage dealer early on. It's amazing at just destroying targets, applying huge poison, plus of course it's also going to help us reset our skills with one of the upgrades. Plus, as it's active, any remaining enemy that has its entire HP bar affected by poison will instantly get one-shotted by it, with the exception of elites, but that's still helpful. However, this will go a couple of steps above with intricacy, which makes casting that ultimate to also make your last potency, defensive or focus skill to reset and be castable for free up to 3 times for the next 5 seconds. That is why I said this is going to work really great with a touch of death. If you made it a core skill, you can now apply it really quickly on the boss. And you can go with Supremacy, which further makes that ultimate to provide you a stacking buff, which increases your damage, but that will start decaying over time. And finally, our capstone will be Noxious Resonance. Your critical strikes cause enemies to burst 100% of their total poisoning as direct poison damage to themselves and surrounding enemies. This is basically what's going to execute and instantly make enemies pop as you apply more and more poison over time on them. But with that out of the way, let's go over the items as well as some of the legendary aspects. Now, like I said, if you go with the Centipede in the Spirit Hall, I suggest Loyalty's Mantle, especially if you match them. This is going to double that effect. If you're planning to not use that or go with the Gorilla Spirit instead, you can just use something like the Disobedience aspect or Protector and put that on a different legendary helmet. On the chest armor, I recommend Razor Plate. This is the first one that gives you a huge amount of thorns, about 1,000 to like 1,500 at 750 eye level. So this is going to immediately enable this build so you can increase that damage, especially as you're going to then couple this on the weapon with the Tormentor's aspect. That's going to make enemies who move while poisoned to be additionally damaged up to like 500% of your thorns damage. So imagine having like 1,000 plus thorns and having that buff on the target plus the poison over time. This is what's going to completely destroy targets. This combo between Tormentor as well as the Razor Blade. Beyond this, I recommend the Inevitable Fate aspect. This is going to make enemies who fall below 35% HP to just burst in a poison damage. Helps a ton, plus it's going to spread that AoE even more. And of course, the Menacing aspect, which is going to make Scourge to continuously affect enemies around you for up to 9 seconds. So you will move with that circle around you even after casting and leaving behind that Scourge right there. Plus, we're going to extend the range on that so much that we're going to affect a ton of targets around us. There are a few more skills here that I recommend. One of them is the Soil Power aspect. So this is going to randomly cause a Mystic Circle to appear at your feet for 10 seconds. And if you cast a Centipede skill inside of it, it will further empower it to deal more poison damage over time, which is very helpful, especially against bosses. Beyond this, also aspect of Pestilence and of Infestation will make Pestilence swarms to appear when you use the Stinger ability or cast Centipede skills respectively. So these Pestilence swarms are going to travel very far around you, affect a lot of targets, and the more enemies you hit with these abilities, the more of those swarms appear, which means more damage over time, and damage over time means just more finishers and more executions against those targets. Now, in terms of the stats to hunt for, here are some of the best I recommend, besides going with Dexterity, which increases your skill damage, and maybe some overall life depending on how much survivability you have. But beyond that, I recommend going with damage over time, damage against crowd control, damage. Pretty much all of these are going to help a ton. Also, if you can, on some of your weapons, go with a range extension on your Scourge ability. As I've talked about before, you can drastically increase that range by up to like 100%, pretty much doubling it so it reaches further away, making it much easier for you to take down more targets. Especially since you're not as mobile as maybe something like a rogue, it can help quite a bit in the meantime. And finally, we have the Paragon boards. However, keep in mind that my version of the game, which I'm assuming to be the latest, is significantly different compared to the build planners I'm seeing online from the PTR. So there are some massive changes to some of the nodes, but the glyphs otherwise remain the same. So in the first one, we have the faster glyph. This just increases Centipede damage, our primary source of damage, plus it's going to make our Centipede skills deal increased damage versus crowd control enemies by another 15%. For the next board, we use the Spiny Skin. The glyph here is going to be Bane. This increases our poison damage, plus it makes poison damage to have a 15% chance to deal double the amount of damage over time duration. And in this case, the legendary node here helps us provide more thorns. So as we use cooldowns, we gain 20% thorns for 5 seconds, which helps quite a bit. The next Paragon board is going to be Sapping. In this case, the legendary node right here can help as we cast these abilities, including Centipede, to restore some of our vigor and also deal increased damage. So helping quite a bit with that too. And the glyph we use is Consumption. It's going to make Pestilence Swarm deal more damage. Plus, it also increases the damage of the Touch of Death, one of our main damage abilities. We use Revealing. This is going to help a bit more with dealing damage against crowd control targets. Plus, we use Canny, provides more non-physical damage. So Poison in this case also works. Plus, enemies that take non-physical damage and take even more damage, up to 10% for 15 seconds. So further providing more debuffs. And finally, the last one is Bitter Medicine. So when we heal 100% of our maximum HP, we deal some extra damage to close by enemies, and it's going to increase by our healing received bonus. Plus, we use the Ritual, which will further buff up the Mystic Circle potency and increase our damage. So like I said, that Mystic Circle can help a ton with the Centipede potency in general. And that is pretty much it with the build. This is going to help you reach at least Torment 2. So this is going to be quite helpful in the first couple of days when you start playing and just want to try out the Spiritborn class and maybe get yourself ready for the higher and higher challenges. Of course, I'm going to follow soon with other builds for the class, including some of the other key abilities over there. So stay tuned for that. And in the meantime, I'll see you in the next video.